In Berlin, after World War II, money was short, supplies were tight, and it seemed like everyone was hungry. At that time, people were telling the tale of a young woman who saw a blind man picking his way through a crowd. The two started to talk. The man asked for a favor. Could she deliver the letter to the address on the envelope? Well, it was on her way home, so she agreed. She started out to deliver the message when she turned around to see if there was anything else the blind man needed. But she spotted him, hurrying through the crowd without his smoking glasses or white cane. She was naturally suspicious, so she went to the police. When the police paid a visit to the address on the envelope, they made a gruesome discovery. 3 butchers had been harvesting human flesh and selling it to the starving people. And what was in the envelope the man gave to the woman? A note, saying simply, "This is the last one I am sending you today."
Soundwave superior. Autobots inferior.
Does anyone remember an old PC game from the early 1990s called Mr. Mix? It's mainly a typing game, similar to Mario Teaches Typing, where you have to type the words into a box to make a chef, the titular Mr. Mix, put recipes into a bowl. Unlike most typing games, however, this game is notorious for having an insane difficulty curve. The game has a words per minute requirement for each level, being as low as 10 on level 1 and as high as 85 on the third. By level 5, the requirement reaches over 500, effectively making it impossible to proceed any further. One of the main things that people noticed about the game immediately was the background music. The music on the first level was an unsettling pattern of groans that got progressively louder as the level went on, often causing damage to early computer speakers that were not designed to handle extremely loud volumes of sound. The second level had no music at all, and the third had what sounded like an extremely low quality recording of a hairdryer playing in the background. The 2 remaining levels had extremely loud pitch ringing throughout the level that caused severe eardrum damage to those who managed to get that far. Another rather disturbing aspect of the game was the design of Mr. Mix himself, who was a large, round-faced, overweight man with large, beady eyes and red spots on his cheeks. Most children who played the game reported having vivid nightmares of Mr. Mix speaking to them in a quiet, raspy voice and threatening them to keep quiet about something. However, none of them could remember exactly what it was. One of these psychologists who saw many of these children reported being disturbed by the sheer amount of terror on the faces of the children as they recounted the details of the nightmare. Many of the children broke down in tears in the process, begging for their parents to save them. However, no direct relationship to the game itself could be determined by these few cases, as not all children suffered the same adverse effects. For obvious reasons, this game did not sell very well. It remained in relative obscurity until a few years ago, when PC hackers got hold of a ROM of the game and started digging through it. Using memory hacking software, they managed to crack the game's code and bypass the impossible 5th level. What they found, however, was extremely disturbing and caused many of them to quit the expedition altogether. According to the reports these hackers left behind, the game behaves very strangely if the 5th level is bypassed. The game crashes violently and closes, writing a bunch of files to the user's System32 directly to the point that the RAM was almost completely filled. These files are reportedly pictures of people with horribly disfigured faces, appearing to scream in pain and agony, with their eyes appearing to be bleeding from their tear ducts, and their outer layer of skin torn clean off in multiple pieces. If the user attempts to delete these files, the computer will violently crash and blue screen, causing permanent, irreplaceable damage to the user's hard drive. The hackers found that this was caused by a lone byte in the game's ROM that triggered when the 5th level was completed. After removing this byte, they were able to proceed to the 6th and final level. Unfortunately, all the original hackers declined to discuss what they saw in the final level. All of them became extremely paranoid and reclusive, refusing to talk about anything related to the game, and show... Okay, what the fuck is that word? Unfortunately, all the original hackers declined to discuss what they saw in the final level. All of them became extremely paranoid and reclusive, refusing to talk about anything related to the game, and showing astonishingly extreme symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of them ceased to be able to form cohesive sentences within a week, and within a month, all of them went missing. All remaining copies of the game were destroyed. To this day, no one knows what was on that game that caused them so much psychological damage. Maybe it's better that way. 2 years after this incident, a man was arrested after trying to kidnap an 8-year-old girl from a grocery store. Through DNA and fingerprint analysis, the man was identified as one of the original hackers who viewed the final level of the game. He was wearing a white chef's hat and had a look of unspeakable malice and insanity on his face. When interrogated, the man would only say one thing: "I'm Mr. Mix." Shh. Every year, during a period from 1946 to 1952, the residents of a small town in western Germany heard what resembled a 6-gun salute on the 5th of every March. Some residents made frequent trips into the surrounding hills in hopes of finding the source of the noise, but to no avail. The townsfolk eventually named the area Gunpowder Hill. The children of the town even created a legend about it, stating that soldiers who in that time were missing had been executed and were buried somewhere in the hill. The purpose of the 6-gun salute was to guide people to the location of the men. On the 15th of March, every year, the children would gather at the edge of town, eagerly awaiting the 6-gun shots to be heard. In late 1951, the hills on the outskirts of the small German town were surveyed for the future construction of the NATO military site. The military base was to consist of a series of deep underground bunkers and weapon supplies in the case of a Soviet invasion. In February 1952, construction began. Just 4 weeks later, the crew began digging a massive 200-foot deep hole for the future underground storage bunkers. It was during this time that the crew made a morbid discovery. As they neared the end of the digging operation, a human hand was seen sticking out of the bottom of the hole. Upon future examination, 27 bodies were discovered at the bottom of the 200-foot deep hole, dressed in prisoner of war uniforms worn by Allies in Nazi war camps. A NATO officer ordered for the bodies to be exhumed immediately. As the medical team watched the bodies being carried out of the hole, they looked on in puzzlement. The bodies were remarkably well preserved. Furthermore, the POW uniforms bore a strange insignia, unlike any of the men have seen before. an orange circle, and a single black dash in the middle. However, the most unsettling characteristics was the faces. Their eyes were wide open, and their mouths were sealed shut with some unknown adhesive. The bodies were immediately dispatched to the local morgue for identification and pathological examination. That night, the local mortician began his work. He found it difficult to concentrate on his task. The eyes of the first man he was to begin work on seemed to be staring back at him. The mortician took his scalpel, began his first cut. Blood poured out of the incision with staggering force. The mortician backed away from the table in shock as red liquid began running down the table, pooling onto the floor below. The eyes of the body began watering and streaks of tears ran down its face. Soon, its eyes rolled back into its head and the bleeding ceased. In horror, the mortician ran to the door, and not before catching a glance at the 26 other bodies laying out on separate tables. Their eyes stared at him with hopeless fear. The men were still alive.
Wyoming today, making him the first to visit in preparation for the 2008 general election. Republican President Jackson.
The Wyoming Incident, or the Wyoming hijacking, is a lesser-known case of television broadcast hijacking. A hacker managed to interrupt broadcasts from a local programming channel, believed to serve several small communities in the county of Niobrara, and aired his/hers own video. The video contained numerous clips of disembodied human heads showing various emotions and poses. The camera position changed often, usually every 10 to 15 seconds, and the video was often interrupted by a special presentation announcement. This clip is taken from one of these intervals. The video is mostly locally well known, and would probably not even be that popular if it were not for the effects it had on the few residents who watched it for an extended period of time. Complaints included vomiting, hallucinations, headaches, etc. Some believe it was paranormal. Specialists have determined that the cause of these inflictions were frequencies played regularly throughout the broadcast. In this clip, the frequency being played is somewhere between 17 and 19 Hz. This range of frequency, when played for long periods of time, causes the eyes to suddenly vibrate, sometimes inducing visual hallucinations. This video is significant in that it is one of the most recent television hackings. Such actions were rare even in the 80s, and are even more rare today. The hacker has not yet been caught, and all attempts to trace the video have proven futile.
Soundwave superior. Autobots inferior.
A few months ago, a friend of mine, who was a nature photographer, decided to spend a day and night alone in the woods, outside of our town. She wanted to get photos of the woods and wildlife as naturally as she could for her portfolio. She wasn't afraid of being alone, as she had camped by herself many times before. She set up a tent in the middle of a small clearing and spent the day taking pictures. She filled up 4 rolls of film on that trip, but when she went and got them developed, she saw 4 pictures that unsettled her. These 4 pictures were taken from inside the tent, of her, asleep, in the middle of the night.